Hello, class. This is Context 2, the history of books. Yesterday, we talked about the history of writing and how it went from markings on a cave all the way up to computers and pictures to symbols and back to pictures like the smiley. So our essential questions for today are: what are books? Where did bookmaking begin? What did the earliest books look like? How were early books made? And how did books evolve over time? On the right here, you're looking at a book of days from the medieval era. And think about it was kind of like, I guess, a planner. And it would tell you about each day, whether it was a biblical reference or a holiday or whatnot. And then it was super illustrated. It would have a lot of these decorative kind of plants and things around it. But then over here, you see in the illustration, we have this kind of odd little picture. We have Jesus up there in the corner, peeking out of the wall, down to this person who is probably a saint because she has a halo. And she's kind of coming out of the side of a dragon. And my guess is, though I will have to look this up, is that she got eaten by a dragon and he is saving her. And then you notice that some of the words are in red, some of them are decorative, the letters, things like that. So what are books? Books are collections of visual information, whether it's words or pictures, or a combination of them. A physical book, which is the pages between covers, how we think of books in our culture, is specifically called a codex. So these two old books are codexes. You can see the covers, and there's the spine, and then you have the signatures with the pages that have all of your information. So where bookmaking began, the earliest book bound. So it's not just, information on a wall or a clay tablet or a rock or whatever, or a piece of paper, but bound that you could turn, is the Etruscan Gold Book. It dates to 600 BCE, and it's shown here on the right. It's made of really super thin sheets of gold that are embossed with the design. Embossing is when you kind of draw on metal and you draw hard enough that the surface is raised, and then it has holes punched in it and these rings that hold it together so you could flip the pages. There's no words in the book, there's only pictures. There are the soldiers that are carrying the offering here. There's also a horse and rider and a mermaid and a harp. And it was found in a tomb in Bulgaria. There are other books like this that have been found, but they don't have this connecting part. They are the thin gold sheets, and they have the holes in them to be bound. That's how they made books at this time. For one thing, gold doesn't rot, so it would last a long time. But a lot of these, of course, are gone because of people looting tombs and taking the gold and using it for money, melting it down and whatnot. So the earliest books tended to be large, and they had pages made of papyrus. This is after the gold books. And papyrus is a plant, and it's woven together into a fabric, and then it's beaten until it all kind of mashes and sticks together. One of the best known examples of a papyrus book is the one shown. It's the Egyptian Book of the Dead. Remember the Rosetta Stone from yesterday? They needed that Rosetta Stone in order to translate the Egyptian Book of the Dead. It has been translated, and I think I have a translation around here somewhere. I'll look for it. It's either here or at home or in the studio. But it describes their rituals, it describes how mummies are made, what happens in the afterlife, and all of those things that were associated with death in Egypt, which was a huge part of their spiritual beliefs. In China, the first bound books were bamboo books, like this one, where bamboo was cut into thin strips and then written on top to bottom. That's how Asian languages are often read. And then the strips you can see at the end are bound together. So this is exactly like window blinds. The same kind of format. When you look at the blinds, the mini blinds in class or the mini blinds at home, it works the same way. And you can pull it up and it kind of collapses into a scroll. And bamboo resists rot. It's a very light, tough wood. So this was another way to write where your material didn't decay as much. You can see how much the papyrus decayed over time and was damaged, where the bamboo book is not at all. In Mesoamerica, Mexico, Central America, there were Aztec codex books like this one. They were made of agave fiber or very thin deer skin that would be scraped to remove all the hair and then pounded so it would be almost, you could see through it. And they were folded into book form. So instead of the pages being cut and then joined together by sewing or tying or something like that, it's the same sort of process that you're going to do for your activity today in order to create the shape of the book. The oldest one that we have is from 1500, but we know that they were made from about 3 CE. A lot of them were lost or destroyed during the Spanish invasion when they looted and pillaged and burnt things because they didn't think they were important. This is the Book of Kells. It's from the British Isles in 800 AD, and they're not sure whether it's Scotland, Ireland, or England that created it, but it lives in Ireland now in Dublin. And the text is illuminated. So that means that important words, and you can kind of see on the side here some of them, were decorated with gold, or they had little pictures, or they had color in them. And the illustrations themselves were full page and full color. Things like around the cross there, that's gold leaf. That is where gold is pounded super fine. And you put down a special kind of glue, and the gold sticks to the page where the glue is. The whole books like this were made entirely by hand. Monasteries would make them, and the different monks would have different jobs. This type of book is very, very rare, and now it's priceless. Literally. The first book that was ever printed, which is mass-produced, was the Diamond Sutra. And this was printed in China 868 AD, so that's just 68 years after the Book of Kells. And it's a Chinese philosophical religious text. It's illustrated, and they printed it using wood blocks. So instead of writing on the page, they would carve the words or the design into a piece of wood. Now, because when you print, things go down backwards, everything had to be done backwards. And then you put ink on the block, and then you stamp it down on your surface. And you could do that however many times in order to create the first mass-produced books. The last time one of the copies of the Diamond Sutra was sold, it sold for $70 million. Yeah. Old books are awesome. The first book printed using a printing press was a Gutenberg Bible. The printing press was invented in 1454 by Johannes Gutenberg. And what it is, instead of carving everything into wood blocks, it's a metal press, and it has type, which are individual metal letters that are kind of set on a wooden peg. And you can move the type around to make your words and things. And then once you have your type set up, you put the ink on it and you print that page. Now, you don't go page by page by page. So if I was going to print a book and print 10 copies of the book, I would set one page, then I would print 10 of that page, just like you would on a copy machine. And then I go to the next page, print 10 of that page, etc. If there was color added, you can see there is red and blue and some illustrations. That was done by hand. That was put in by hand. So how books are made, and these parts will become important when you get to the studio part. You guys have a bit of an advantage because you know what they are before you do it. The books that we are working with, which are the traditional books for our culture, they have covers, which are the front cover, the back cover. Their job is to protect the pages inside. You have the body or the text block, which are your pages inside. The page and leaves are individual sheets of paper. A leaf means both sides. A page is one side, okay? A signature is a group of pages that are bound together, and I will show you what that is, and you'll recognize it from books. You know it. You've seen it, you just don't know what it's called. The end paper are the blank pages at the beginning and end of a book. It's where after you have the body bound together and attached to the spine and the covers, then you put the end pages on there to kind of protect the text block and so that it looks nice. So when you make books, the leaves are folded in half, and that creates a page. And then they're stacked up and sewn up the middle to make a signature. And then the signature is sewn to a cloth strip, which is the binding. If you look here at the illustration, you can see, if you look at the edge of the pages, how they are kind of in little groups. Those groups are the signatures. And then that red and yellow, that's the cloth, that's the binding. And then that's glued to the spine. So you have the cover, the spine that's glued here to the binding, and there's the back cover. And then these are the end papers that cover all that gluing. It's lots of work to assemble a book by hand like this. And once upon a time, all books were made that way. Really good books right now are still made this way by hand instead of with machines. And that's why they were so expensive. So how books evolved over time. They started off with those cave walls we talked about yesterday. Then on the clay tablets, where you could take your clay, write onto it, and then if you let it dry, the writing would stay there. But then if you wanted to erase it, you could get the clay wet and smooth it over. If you wanted that writing to be permanent, then you would fire it, just like if you were making a clay cup or something, and it would kind of cook that writing in. Then because clay, though, it's very fragile, so they took wooden tablets, and then they covered the tablet with a thick layer of wax, and you would write into the wax, and that wasn't breakable. And you could still warm up the wax in order to erase things. But both of those were bulky and heavy to carry around. So then they developed in the Middle East and Africa and Asia, they developed papyrus, which ended up becoming paper. The plant in more northern areas and Mesoamerica, which has a different kind of environment, and in Europe, which also has a different kind of environment, they use parchment and vellum. Parchment is the skin, like I talked about in the codex, where you take a deer skin or a goat skin or a cow skin. Those are the three that were used the most. You scrape off the hair and you scrape it until it's very thin and flexible and preserved, and then you can write on it. Vellum you do the same thing, but you use a very young animal. So we're talking a calf or a fawn or a kid, and their skin is naturally thinner and it becomes almost translucent. If you look back, I'm flipping back to the Book of Kells real quick. You can kind of see how you can see through the page. That's because that's vellum. It's transparent. And those things could be rolled up, and they were rolled up into scrolls, and those scrolls were kept, some of them were kept in copper tubes or wooden boxes or different ways or bags, and they could be transported very easily and stored very easily. Then bound books included those bamboo books in China, the Aztec codexes, and the European style codex, which is our regular style of book. And books have changed again, because they started out being handwritten, and they would be produced by a team. And for something like the Book of Kells or one of the others, and these were usually religious groups, monks, though nuns did too, but it was usually monks. And you would have one guy that did the writing, one guy who would go over and do the capital letters. One person would work on the illustration, one person would put in the gold. And so it was a lot like a comic book is made, because comic books are often made by a team of people, where one does the drawing, one does the inking, one does the writing, and things of that. When the printing press was invented, it was easier to make mechanical copies of books and mass produce them. And that's most of the books that are physical that we know. And then they invented electronic readers. And this was after internet and the computers were common. They figured out the technology to do a very simple screen that just showed text, no pictures, no anything. And that's what the first e-readers were, the first Kindles. You had to plug them into a computer to download things. You couldn't like automatically download things, and you couldn't have like a bunch of different books on them. You had like a book at a time. They displayed the text on the screen, and then you go through it and just read it like that. Now, a lot of the Kindles and things are super smart. You can have a whole library. They're connected to the web. You can do other things on them too. A lot of books right now that are new books are only published electronically like this. They're never printed out in a hard copy unless somebody just wants to do it for themselves, because it's a lot less expensive to have the books produced electronically. And then a lot of times you'll notice that they're a little less expensive than if you were to buy a paperback, and a whole lot less expensive than to buy a hardbound book. But the profit margin for the author is still really high, because there's not any expenses of physically getting the book made. So your assignment is you're going to try it. You're going to make a folded origami book. You need your Chromebook for this. You need a piece of paper. It does not have to be square, a rectangular piece of paper, just regular paper, and some scissors. I have a linked video tutorial that's really good. If you know how, slow it down, okay? And feel free to pause it. There's also text directions linked to make the book. It's the same directions for both. The text directions have the extra step of making a fancy cover, but you don't have to do that. I just want you to be able to make the small origami book. And then you turn it in, photograph it, and upload. That's it.